Good morning, everybody. Is the sound okay? Good. I know you've been here a day, but let me add my welcome to New Orleans, and specifically here to this neighborhood, downtown New Orleans. You might not know it, but 3 blocks in that direction is the actual birthplace of jazz. And about 7 blocks in that direction is the birthplace of drinking responsibly on a Sunday. We called it brunch. And about 10 blocks in that direction is the birthplace of Huey Long socialism. So I guess 2 out of 3 isn't bad. You all have heard of Huey Long, right? Every Man a King. And you've probably heard the Randy Newman song about Huey. If there's something belonging to others, there's enough for all people to share. I want you to hold that thought. I'll get back to socialism in a second, but there's another story I want to tell you about that ends up here in downtown New Orleans. It's a story about my grandfather, who he came to this country in the late 1800s. That was before illegal immigration was invented. When he came here, he didn't come here right away. He ended up out west in Nevada or Arizona, and we aren't really sure where. He got a job and he saved money, and he put down a down payment and took out a loan and opened a business and went broke. So he got a job, and he made money, and he saved his money, and he paid back the loan. He saved more money to travel to San Francisco, where he put down another down payment, took out another loan, and went broke. Got a job, saved money, paid back the second loan, made enough money to save to come here to New Orleans, put down a down payment, took out a third loan, and opened a business here in 1910, about 3 blocks that way. And that business is still alive today and still feeding some of my cousins. Yeah, it was a pretty good thing. How did he manage to fail twice and still succeed? And in fact, how did the hundreds of thousands of immigrants who came here around the same time manage the exact same thing? Go into business, go broke, make it okay with the lender, and start again. They did it because they had sound money. They did it because when they saved their money and went back to get their money later, it was still worth the same thing. Americans today can't do that with the same ease. Americans today know that no matter what the government says, the cost of living is going up. Everybody knows it. Well, not everybody. I guess you have to go and buy your own groceries. So Congress doesn't know it. The Fed doesn't know it. But we all know it. We know that it's harder. We have to work harder today to make ends meet than our parents did. We know that. It makes us kind of worried. It makes us unsettled. We feel unmoored. We feel like something's not quite right, and we really can't put our finger on it. It should be better than it was for our parents, and it's not. It makes us feel a bit of a failure and a bit as if we're sort of less than others. I started off talking about socialism, and now I'm talking about my grandfather and sound money and why Americans don't feel so comfortable. Hold on to that thought, because we're going to go back to socialism for a minute. Not for long. I hope. Shortly after my grandfather opened the business, the world was engulfed in war. The war was so expensive that every combatant nation went off the gold standard except us. And we went off in the depression that followed the war. The whole world became unmoored. The whole world felt uneasy. Nobody knew what the value of anything was anymore. And in their uncertainty and feeling bad, the world turned to big government. In Germany, there was a particularly nationalistic form of socialism that they decided on. If you were from the right place and you had the right skin color and the right hair color and the right eye color and the right religion, then there was enough of other people's stuff for you to share. That didn't end real well. Now, in the Soviet Union, they picked a different kind of socialism. They weren't going to do something as gross as racism because they had people from all different ethnicities all in this together. So what they decided on was that if you would be a prison guard in a prison the size of a nation, and you were really, really, really good at it, then maybe there wasn't plenty, but there was enough of other people's stuff for you to share. We weren't going to do anything like that in America. We were going to have a more democratic form of socialism. So back to Huey Long and FDR. And you've got to remember, if Huey hadn't been shot, he might have been FDR. We weren't going to call it socialism here. Socialism is a dirty word in American politics. At least it was. So we weren't going to take away people's freedoms when we tried socialist ideas the way the Germans and the Russians did. In fact, Roosevelt loved freedom so much, he invented two new ones. We already had freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and he gave us freedom from fear and freedom from want. And since the Constitution said that government was here to keep your freedoms, then we were going to need some big government solutions to make sure you didn't want for anything and you weren't afraid. So we were going to try it, we just weren't going to call it socialism. So whether you talk about the Great Society, guns and butter, the New Deal, or the Fed, we've been working on socialism in this country for over 100 years. We've been trying really, really hard to take something from someone and make it enough for everyone to share seriously for over 80. Now, when I grew up in a home where Roosevelt was the hero. President Roosevelt saved my parents' families. He won the war. He saved the country. He saved the world. And it never occurred to me that that view of history had another side to it. In school, too, I heard about the same big government solutions being the answer, and that everything was wonderful, and we had been saved by these solutions. There was when you have a multi-million man army that's fighting an actual enemy that wants to kill you, that actually is a pretty believable statement. And the whole country believed it. But the belief didn't end with the war. Generations of us have grown up, starting in our education, in our homes, hearing that big government is the solution to our problems. Now, there may be some people here who were lucky enough to be born into a libertarian family, but most of us had to come to the realization about liberty and freedom much later in life. But American people, after generations of being born and living with these ideas, the American people are attached to socialism. They're attached to big government solutions. And I want you to hold on to that thought. I know I'm asking you to hold on to a lot of thoughts, but you're libertarians, you can do it. It's time to say a little something about why I'm giving this talk. Why is a physician who specializes in addiction talking about the American voter and who he trusts, and why is he talking about socialism? Well, I think you'll understand in a minute, but I've got to tell you something about addiction first, and I want to start with the word addiction. And the reason is I need to tell you about addiction is because just like you and I were misinformed about liberty and government and socialism growing up, we were also greatly misinformed about the nature of what we call addiction. So I want to just set the record straight on that with three big topics, and then we'll be done with it. First, the word itself. The first time the word addiction was used in the English language was in one of Shakespeare's plays. That probably doesn't surprise anybody given his reputation for coining words. It was Othello, Act 2, Scene 2. The town crier comes on stage. The whole scene is one paragraph. But I need to give you the backdrop. The island of Corsica is scared out of its wits. The Turkish fleet is about to arrive. They're going to invade. They're going to kill everybody. They're going to knock down every building. There's going to be wailing and gnashing of teeth. It's going to be horror of biblical proportions. Everybody's frightened out of their mind. And their great general Othello is missing. Nobody knows where he is. There's no one to defend them. And then three things happen at once. News arrives that the Turkish fleet has been destroyed in a storm. Othello shows up, and he's engaged. Well, three big reasons to celebrate. So Othello orders the town criers out into the streets, and the town crier comes out on the stage, and he says that Othello orders every man to put himself into triumph, some to dance, some to make bonfires, each man to what sport and revels his addiction leads him. Why in the world did he need a new word for that? He could have just said, like we do in New Orleans, do what you wanna. He could have said, whatever you choose. Why didn't he use the word choice? Well, Shakespeare didn't know anything about the neurobiology of addiction, but he was a pretty good observer of himself and everyone around him. He knew that we don't actually choose what we like. We don't choose what we enjoy. This is not a cortical, logical decision that we make. He knew there was another word. The word was Latin, addicere, A-D-D-I-C-E-R-E. And if there's a Latin scholar in the room and I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. Addicere is a Roman legal sentence. If you owed money to somebody and you couldn't pay it, that guy would take you to court. And the magistrate would pass the sentence addicere. A-D, add, like our word, addition or adduction, to bring two body parts together. A-D in Latin just means together, to bring together. And dicere means I declare. So he was saying, I declare these two together. They're not together because they want to be. They're not together because they choose to be. I'm making them together. This one belongs to that one until the money's paid back. It's debt slavery. It's attachment against the will. Shakespeare, though he didn't know anything about the neurobiology, knew that we didn't pick what we liked, what we're attached to. This is deeper. This isn't about the will. I mean, you could make some reasons up later, like, I would have gone dancing, but I read a book that said bonfires are so much morally superior to dancing, so I decided on a bonfire. But Shakespeare knew that's not the real thing that people do. The ones who like bonfires go to bonfires, and the ones that like dancing went dancing. So now you know more about the word addiction than 90% of the people who treat it. Sorry about that. That's the state of healthcare today. I need to tell you something else that most people who treat addiction don't know. And that is, it's a little bit about the neurobiology. It's a little bit about all that stuff Shakespeare didn't know. But don't worry, there are no slides. I'm not going to give you scientific references. If you want that stuff, come see me later. But I'm only going to tell you enough for libertarians. The basic biology of addiction is a low tone, a low signal in the brain's reward center. This reward center is in the midbrain, not in the cortex. That cortex, that human cortex, that's the part hopefully you're listening with right now, and hopefully I'm using to talk. It's the part we're hopefully going to be using when we're thinking about how to vote later as delegates. The midbrain is deeper and much older. The midbrain reward system is part of a survival mechanism that's been keeping mammals alive for over 100 million years. Every mammal alive has the same reward system you do. So addiction's really not just the human problem people thought it was. Now, there are 3 different ways you can get this low signal. The first is the Nancy Reagan way, the way that most people believe everybody gets addiction. You use drugs, they break your brain, now you have addiction. But I've got to tell you, after treating thousands of people and talking to thousands of people with this disease, very, very few of them actually got addiction this way. Although that's the way our government thinks everybody got addiction, and that's the way all of our prevention and all of our messaging is directed. The second way you can get addiction is to be born with it. There are a large number of genetic causes of low tone in that reward signal. Now imagine, for a normal person, the world has an attachment landscape. You're walking through the world and there are many, many things to attach to. I like that food, and that's my favorite movie, and this is my best friend, and I love going to that place. And this field of attachment has rolling hills, lush with grass. And for the person with low signal in the reward center, that landscape is a flat desert. Those normally rewarding things that attach us to life just aren't there. They don't make the grade because of that low tone. And then someone comes along with a cigarette or a chocolate eclair or World of Warcraft, and there's a huge mountain. And because it's such a huge mountain in comparison to a flat desert, it gravitates the entire attention of the organism onto that one thing. It makes the midbrain think, that's the thing I need to survive. That's where I'm getting the signal from. Now, there's another way, the way that most people who are born without addiction get it, and that's from our social interactions, our environment. You can actually lower somebody's reward tone by changing their environment, and there's 2 specific ways I want to tell you about today. One is physical isolation. Put you in a room by yourself with bars on the window. That'll do it. And the second is to feel like you're less than others. You do one of those 2 things to people, and their reward tone goes down, and they start looking frantically for something to make them feel better. I'm almost done with addiction. I just have to tell you one more thing, and it's about the addiction treatment industry. The entire addiction treatment industry, all of those rehabs you see advertising on TV, all of those doctors, all of those treatment centers, they're all competing for 16% of the people with addiction. All of those free market businesses ignoring 84% of the market. Why would they do that? Because like us, they grew up hearing that addiction is a cortical disease, that it's a thinking problem, that we have addiction because we don't think right. We thought bad about drugs and we got addiction because we used them, and now all we have to do is change our thinking, think differently, and we'll be fine. And they're all competing for that same 16% of people who have lost enough, been hurt enough, or in enough pain to listen to what they said. You want a guy to go to rehab for 60 days? Well, this one just lost his job and got kicked out of his house. His social calendar's free. Sure, he'll go. He'll do exactly what you want him to do. You've heard the term hit bottom? Everybody here has heard the term hit bottom. Well, that's what they're all waiting for. That's the 16%. They all want those easy patients who've hit bottom. You've been holding so many thoughts in your head now, it's time to put you out of your misery. I told you Americans are attached to socialism. I told you attachment and addiction are really the same word. I told you that addiction is not cortical at all, but it's a midbrain phenomenon. It's not a deliberate choice. I've told you that one way to give people addiction is to make them isolated and feel less than. And I told you that our current situation with the depreciating money Makes us all feel a little bit less than. It makes us want to go back to the thing that makes us feel good rather than think about new ideas. And I told you the whole addiction treatment industry is waiting on those few people who hit bottom. Well, guess what? You, we, the people in this room, we libertarians, we're those people. We hit bottom. We had enough pain from socialism, enough pain from loss of freedom and loss of liberty that we had a moment of clarity and we woke up. And we want to share that with everybody else, just like the people who started the addiction treatment industry. They got sober and they wanted to help everybody else, and we're making the same mistake they made. We think that everyone else is going to have to get sober the way we got sober. That's a great strategy if your goal is 16% or 3%. If you're waiting for everybody to hit bottom, it's not going to win any elections, it's not going to increase the liberty of Americans, and it's not going to set the world free in our lifetime. You've seen all those commercials on TV. The guy from the rehab says, "Come to our rehab and you'll stop drinking and you'll feel better." And the guy on the sofa back home is looking at the TV and he says, "I have stopped drinking in the past and I felt worse. These guys don't understand nothing. I don't trust them." And the guy from the rehab, he says, "Come to our rehab and you'll stop using cocaine and your life will be great." And the guy on the sofa thinks, "I've tried life without cocaine and it's gray and there's no joy in it. And cocaine's the only thing that gives me any pleasure. These guys don't know me at all. I don't trust them." The entire addiction treatment industry is speaking cortex to a bunch of midbrains, and the midbrains are calling bullshit. Remember that the midbrain has been keeping mammals alive for 100 million years. The cortex that we've been talking to when we talk about freedom and liberty, it's been around for what, 1 million? It's not going to compete with the midbrain. But we love the cortex. We think the cortex is the be-all, end-all. We don't want to think that we're running around here acting on drives. We're highly principled libertarians. We're thinking about everything. That's why we lie to ourselves about why we like bonfires better than dancing. If talking to the cortex was going to work, look around you. You've got the best cortical arguers in the world in this room. Brilliant libertarians. Right? Been at it for 40 years. If talking to the cortex was going to work, it would have worked by now. So when we say we're going to get rid of the Department of Education, that guy on the sofa says, "Who the hell's going to educate my kids? I don't want to do it. Wait, are they going to be running the streets? That's going to be chaos. These people are going to get us killed. I don't trust them." When we say we're going to cut defense spending by a lot, now I mean a lot, the guy on the sofa says, "But wait a minute, the Soviets were 10 feet tall, and we had to have all that defense spending, and when they went away, Al-Qaeda was 10 feet tall, and we needed all that defense spending, and all right, it turned out that neither one of them was 10 feet tall, but somebody is 10 feet tall, and they're coming to get us. You guys are going to get us killed. I don't trust you." We're speaking the logic of the cortex to a part of the brain that feels, and it not only feels, it only feels two things. It feels, I have enough and everything is okay, or I don't have enough and nothing is okay. That's the only two signals you get from your midbrain. So when there's enough midbrain reward signal, the cortex gets a signal that everything's okay. Go ahead and be a human. Make plans for the future. You want to build a fence around your yard? Go ahead. Oh, cooperate with your neighbor. That's a really good idea because he might help you sometime in the future. Think about the future. That's great. When there's not that signal, the cortex turns off. We go from the cortical message of all of us, everywhere, forever, to me, here, now. And we're focused on the problem in front of us that we think is going to kill us. The thing that we perceive as a threat to our survival. And when you come and talk to me about what ought to happen in 10 years, or you've got some highfalutin philosophical argument, my midbrain says that guy's distracting you from your survival. Don't trust him. I make it sound kind of hopeless, don't I? But it isn't. When we started our treatment center, we wanted to aim for the 84% of people because we thought it was better business. It was also, we had a goal of ending addiction in our lifetime, and we figured we weren't going to get there by attracting 16% of people at a time. So it turned out that we found ways to make the midbrain feel better. It turned out there are ways without force, without coercion, that you can treat addiction. There are ways you don't have to take away drugs from people. You get to treat them, make them feel better, and they just don't want to use drugs anymore. You don't have to force them. You don't have to pull it away. They let go because there's a better alternative. And the business that we built on those discoveries was so good that I sold it, and that gave me the leisure to come here and talk to you today. I've learned a lot treating addiction, and one of the things I learned is if you're waiting for people to hit bottom, most of them die. The bottom is a myth, and it's a myth politically too. Trying to increase somebody's pain does not make them hit bottom, it just makes them avoid you. It doesn't work treating addiction, and it doesn't work politically. Talking cortex to somebody with a midbrain problem and a midbrain attachment just makes them not trust you. Here's what did help. We focused on the now. We focused on the midbrain. We asked ourselves, why in the world would anyone in their right mind stay attached to something that was hurting them? And that's the key. We assumed they were in their right mind. Only when you assume the person you're trying to engage is in their right mind can what they're doing that is inexplicable start to make sense to you. You start to see that behavior on the surface that you've identified as the problem isn't the problem. It's just the effect of an underlying cause. And that allows you to identify that cause and fix that cause. We've all been focused on what we thought was the problem, which isn't a problem, it's just the effect. And we've been ignoring the cause. But we didn't. And we didn't assume they weren't in their right mind like the rest of the addiction treatment industry does. But how do we libertarians handle that? When we talk to Republicans and Democrats, do we assume they're in their right mind? No. And you know what? They know we think they're crazy. Do you trust people who think you're crazy? No, and neither will they. So you have to get past that behavior. And looking at the midbrain works no matter what the behavior is. Whether you're trying to change what someone's putting in their body or what lever they're pushing in a voting booth. It's the same. We did it with addiction, it works. It's going to work politically too. You address the real underlying problem, and people will change. Even if they didn't want to change when they started. Even if they didn't know they had to change when they started. It works. We also discovered, though, that you can get that same outside behavior effect for a bunch of different reasons. Not everybody with addiction involving alcohol drinks for the same reason as everybody else with addiction involving alcohol. And that means that everyone who has addiction involving alcohol needs their own treatment, their own unique, individualized treatment. And not everybody who voted for Trump voted for the same reason. So when you're talking to people who voted for Trump, you can't give the same spiel to everybody. You have to give that guy his individual spiel. You've got to give that guy the little building block that he needs. And before you say that I'm making it sound too complex and it's just too hard and nobody could do that, I want to remind you that while I've been talking, Starbucks upstairs just did that 40 times. They took a set of known building blocks. They determined what the customer needed. They took exactly and only exactly the building blocks they needed, and they put them together in the exact right order to meet the customer's needs, and they did it quickly, and they did it with high customer satisfaction. Mass customization. It can be done with coffee. I've seen it done with addiction, and it can be done politically too. You have to assume that person you want to engage is in their right mind. If you don't, you're lost. So we had to figure out with addiction how somebody goes from active addiction to full voluntary recovery. We didn't have to make anything up. We wanted to look, how does it actually happen in nature? And we found there's 5 different cognitions that a person had to get, that everyone who entered recovery had, and everybody who didn't enter recovery didn't have. And you had to get these 5 cognitions in order. And it turned out that when humans take on a new cognition, there's 4 steps. 5 cognitions, 4 steps, 4 times 5, 20. Gave us 20 different scores. So when a patient came in, we didn't have to worry so much about was he using cocaine or alcohol. What we worried about was he a 5 or a 7? Because the 5 needed a different intervention than a 7. And a 7 needed a different intervention than an 11. And we only wanted to give each patient what he needed to move to the next score. Because you can only talk to a 5 about becoming a 6. You can't talk to a 5 about becoming a 20. That's the mistake that the entire addiction treatment industry makes. And we make it along with them. Everybody who enters rehab, everybody, the whole industry is aiming for perfect sobriety, recovery, giant. And when we talk to people, what are we aiming for? 10 out of 10, highly principled libertarian. Look at any of those Facebook groups libertarian groups on Facebook. Young, new libertarian guy, he read something, he heard something, he gets on the Facebook thing, he's reading, he's seeing something interesting. He asks a question. And somebody who's got, 3 years of libertarian experience, and has read Hayek, says, hey, you're stupid. That's wrong. That's not principled. That's not even going to get us 16%. That's not going to get us enough to govern. I'm giving this talk today because I've spent my adult life learning to help people with midbrain attachment change their behavior. I'm talking to you because the attachment of the American people to big government solutions and their chains is not cortical, it's not logical. It's a midbrain problem. It's based on perceived survival need. I've been successful in finding a way to help people with midbrain attachment change even when they did not have motivation to change initially. And we did it in numbers that would have won an election had it been an election. We need to step back and look at ourselves through everyone else's eyes. Do we look like an elite debating society, or do we look like a group of people who just want to be right? Would we rather be right and look down on them, or would we rather convince them to vote for us and then serve them in government? Do we look like a group who would like to go off and read a book in a coffee shop, or help other people live their lives better and more freely? Do we look like an elite debating society, or do we look like an American political party? I'm honestly confused sometimes. I'm not sure we all do believe we're an American political party. I think some of us do want to be in an elite debating society, and that's fine. There are plenty of other places, as Walter said last night, in the liberty movement for other functions besides American political party. But if you want people to vote for you, you're going to have to be an American political party. The American people are attached to the idea that somebody's going to have to take care of them. And they have come to depend on government to do that. They look around at their friends and their family, and they see people who have needs. And even if it's not true for them, they worry it's going to be soon. Remember, they can't save. They don't have hard money. There's no backstop. They're not going to help themselves. This is all one big system where it goes around and around and around. They don't know another solution to their problem. But they see people who can't. They see people who can't work. They see people who can't own a gun without hurting somebody. They see people who can't even walk around in freedom without disturbing somebody else's rights. And they only believe that government is the thing that can help them. And when we come and tell them that we're going to get rid of this and that government agency and the marketplace is going to fix it, we're saying to them, let go of that good enough solution you already have and trust in something you can't see and can't believe in, that we believe in. And do it because there's a problem that you don't perceive, but that we perceive. And we wonder why they're not flocking to our banners. There were other thoughts, other reasons why American voters don't trust us, but I only have so much time and you only have so much patience. I just want to leave you with a hopeful message. If you heard me blame us for our failure, good. But that's the good news. I'm saying that we're our biggest problem, and if that wasn't true, if there really was a grand conspiracy, an unfair system, a malign external influence that's been holding us down, we wouldn't have a shot. We might as well all go home and build bunkers. If we're our biggest problem, we can change. And the great news is there is a systematic way we can change. We can be more than a third place also ran. We can win elections. We can increase the liberty of Americans, and we can see a world set free in our lifetime. Thank you for your attention today, and I think we have a few minutes for questions or complaints if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
So what is the solution? Now there's, we're 1 through 20, you got the 4 times 5 things. What is the A part of the solution?
So I'd love to tell you that I already have, I've worked out for politics what I worked out for addiction, but I haven't. What I'm suggesting is that we all do that together. I don't know that I know enough, and I don't know that any one of us knows enough. But I know that we together know enough. And I know the system by which we can do that together. The same system. I mean, I didn't just do this with addiction because I looked at it myself and said, oh, look, it's those 5 things. I mean, there is a system I didn't invent called theory of constraints, which allows us to look at all the problems we have and work them back to their causes. And that's what we used to find those 5 cognitions that work in addiction. There are going to be 5 or 7 or 3 or who knows how many different cognitions that we're going to need to move somebody from, active socialism to full voluntary libertarianism. But I wish I could tell you I got them written on a card. But it's good work, and I hope we do it. Yes, sir.
Dr. WETSMAN, just as an addiction treatment specialist, I work in the juvenile courts with parents, and they're accused of fetally exposing infants, and there's this debate about whether babies can be addicted or are they dependent. Yeah. I was curious about your take on that.
So yeah, babies can be addicted because it's a genetic illness. And I think what happens is when you have an assumption that drugs cause addiction, which actually isn't largely true. And by the way, let me just make an aside on that. I'm going to do that, but I want to make a libertarian aside. What's the main reason why drugs are illegal? They cause addiction. They cause addiction. When you look at all of the other arguments, they're all arguable. Except, well, they cause addiction. They hurt people. They cause a disease. And if we actually admitted that drugs don't cause addiction, that it's a genetic illness, think of all the things that would change. But anyway, back to your question. So mom's got addiction. Baby's got at least 50% of the same genetics mom has. Are we really that surprised that baby with mom having addiction is born with addiction? No, it's not that really odd. But when people say baby born with addiction, they don't even mean addiction the way I'm using the term. They mean dependence. They mean mom was using opiates, and this baby is in withdrawal, and it's shaking, and it's sweating, and crying, and uncomfortable, and can't eat, and we need to give it methadone or morphine, hopefully morphine, not methadone, and make it out of withdrawal. You know what? Babies are born in withdrawal from SSRIs because mom was on an SSRI too. I mean, that's not unique to opiates. It's you see it with a lot of pharmaceuticals, and it really doesn't have anything to do with treating addiction or what we ought to do with those moms. Those moms need treatment. It's appalling what happened in Tennessee, I think, where the Surgeon General, the Attorney General, started moms who gave birth to babies who were in withdrawal got charged for endangering their child. It's just, we need to start looking at this as a health problem and not a legal problem, or we'll never fix it. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah. As far as manipulating the midbrain, our current president seems to be very good at that. I just would like your thoughts of how he's able to do this. I mean, he's obviously kind of a flake, but his popularity seems to be continually up.
Yeah.
What's happening?
I was just thinking right before this how being a good politician and being a good governor, and by governor I don't mean of a state, I mean one who governs. Being a good politician and being a good governor is two different things. And Jeff Hewitt made the point yesterday in the elected officials roundtable that getting elected is the easy part. Governing is the hard part. And I think that's true for American presidents. It's probably more true for American presidents than, even though it's very hard to get elected and it costs $1 billion and, I think that they all face that to some extent. This one is probably going to hit a wall bigger than everybody else's wall just because he seems not to trust people. And I have a professional ethical mandate that says I can't diagnose anybody I've never examined, and I can't talk in public about anyone I have examined. So I can neither confirm nor deny the presence of a mental illness in the President of the United States. But when you don't trust people and you hold their loyalty until you need to throw them under the bus, that works for a little while, and then it stops working. And you can ride the wave of populism for a long time, and I think what really scares me more than anything else is as his internal and external support, and I'm not really worried about it, his growing support, because the more support he has, the better he feels. But when that internal and external support starts to fade, I'm very scared he's going to start using the huge power of the executive branch to shore things up and take away freedoms. And it's not a partisan position. I was afraid of that probably with the last 4 or 5 presidents. I'm just afraid of that with the imperial presidency we have today. But you're right, this guy kind of scares me a little bit more than the last one did. There was somebody else? Yes, ma'am.
What role do you think fear plays in setting up the conditions for addiction?
Fear. So that's really interesting. That word fear means something different to just about everybody. And if you look at what it means biologically, the set of what happens in our brain when we have threat of survival, loss of survival. There's a huge adrenergic charge, adrenaline, a huge adrenaline surge. And we actually get a temporary boost in the midbrain because this is part of the survival mechanism. You know, you got to run from a saber-toothed tiger. You need the energy. You need the motivation to run. I mean, can you imagine our ancestors wouldn't have survived if they had said, oh, look, a tiger. You know, they had to run right now. And it can't be cortical. It has to be automatic, or it wouldn't work for survival. So fear actually becomes something that people can start to seek out when they want to feel better. And you probably know somebody who likes drama. You probably know somebody who likes to worry, seeming to. They seem attached to worry. Even when everything's going fine, they find something to worry about. Well, these are midbrain. I mean, when you think about this from its biological standpoint, you stop thinking about drugs and illegal, legal, because most addiction is not around things that are illegal. Probably 7% of people in the country or less use illegal drugs, but up to 20% of us have addiction. So fear can be a drug, and fear can be something we become attached to. And I hope that answers what you were asking. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned before about there's this sort of midbrain and like the higher functions, and we tend to talk to these higher brain functions. How do you communicate to address some of these, you know, more midbrain? How do we communicate to get through, you know, to get through if someone has a real need or a real fear or a real problem? How do we communicate to get to that, to reach them there?
Right. So, yes, I will. I talked about the cortex and the midbrain, that we've been talking to the cortex. How do we actually talk to the midbrain of the person with the real problem? And how do we actually address that? Well, like I said to the first questioner, I'm not going to tell you I have all the answers today, but there are a few things that are obvious. One, you don't deny that the person's problem is a problem. When the guy says, you know, I depend upon the Department of Education, you don't say, well, that's stupid. You shouldn't, right? That's gonna, when you say you're stupid, what happens to the guy's midbrain? It goes down. And he stops listening to you, and he can't attach to you or what you're saying, and he starts reinforcing his attachment to the last thing that made him feel good, which was the Department of Education. So there are a few obvious things that we can do. We could, even if we did this, we'd help ourselves. We'd stop pushing people away, even if we never learn how to engage them. If we just stop disengaging them. Don't call them stupid. Don't call them crazy. Don't tell them their perception is wrong. Don't tell them they're ignorant of the correct political principles. Listen. You know, that's what I heard yesterday. Also, in Jeff Hewitt's panel, I heard all four of the elected officials who talked all said the same thing. I listened. I got elected because I listened. I went and I heard and I said, I didn't tell them what I was going to do. I asked questions. What's your biggest problem? What do you need? How could government help you? And they got elected, and then when they were in, they started to change the system in libertarian ways. But none of those four people got elected by getting up in people's faces and say, I'm a libertarian, and if you don't vote for me, you're stupid. So I don't have all the answers, but that's just one. And hope nobody in here has ever done that or would ever do it again. I think we need to stop because we have 10 minutes to go do the business of the party. Thank you all very much for being here.